The mind is a great servant. It's a terrible master. You have to be in charge of how you want to wire your brain to serve you. And once you understand that like thoughts can crawl through your head, they're like pop-ups on your computer. You don't have to pop on any of them, you know? I like to get people to understand this. I'm like, it's no different than like waking up at 3 a.m. and you're in a deep sleep and your brain is firing thoughts, right? At 3 a.m, right? And it's never good stuff. Like no one's ever like, hey, it's 3 a.m. I want to wake you up and tell you you're just kicking ass in life. Like, great job. You're an awesome mom.
Welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with your host, Thomas Miller. I'm so excited to be joined by Tara Renze. I'll give a quick little bio. She is an author, speaker, podcaster, and an all-around pro at helping people unlock their potential. After years in corporate leadership, she decided to focus on inspiring others to be who they came to be. She is passionate about helping people find purpose, create success, and build the life they want. And I cannot wait, obviously, for everybody to hear from her. Welcome, Tara. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, I'm honored to be on the show today. Thank you for having me.
Cool. And what we're going to talk about today, which is so pertinent to my audience, is how to basically raise our emotional intelligence. Tara is an expert at helping people raise their EQ. She's obviously going to get a chance to speak a lot more about that. But as we all know as parents, right, if we're not emotionally intelligent, right, then our emotions are running roughshod all over our parenting. And so today we're going to talk a lot about how to just be more emotionally intelligent and make sure that we're unflappable, big word, amidst our kids' storm. And Tara is absolutely the right person to help us get there. So I think as we were talking earlier, it would be awesome to hear a little bit about, what was the impetus for what got you to this work. And I know your grandmother has played a really huge role in that. So I'd love for you to share part of that story. It was such a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you go back even further than how the origin of the Be Who You Came to Be story started, I worked in corporate America for almost a decade. I worked in sales and sales leadership. And, the one thing that we realized very early on was that our best sales reps all had one thing in common, and that was this high sense of emotional intelligence. Now, it was the early 2000s, but emotional intelligence wasn't even really talked about until the mid 90s, the late 90s. And then it started peaking and people were really catching on to the fact that it wasn't necessarily how smart you were, but really, what did you bring to the table? How did you manage your own emotions? And then most importantly, how did you make other people feel? So I've been a student of emotional intelligence since the late 90s, early 2000s, continued to study emotional intelligence, ended up getting certified in emotional intelligence. And I think 2018 was when I went and got that certification. And then I also ended up getting certified in something called positive intelligence, which is a really interesting concept that helps us actually elevate our emotional intelligence. So we're going to dive into all of that. But ultimately, what my job right now, what I do is I travel around the country. I'm an author, I'm a keynote speaker, and I'm on this mission to empower people to be who they came to be. And this was all started by a note that my grandmother left my newborn son almost 2 decades ago. She wrote him this beautiful letter the week he was born. She put it on this powder blue stationery, which was perfect for her first great grandchild, who happened to be a little baby boy. And she penned it in her typical, 87-year-old wobbly black ink. But it was the last 2 sentences of this letter that changed the trajectory of my life, and now have changed millions, not millions, probably tens of thousands of people across the country.
Well, we can round up.
My husband always says, whatever Tara says, divide by 2. I'm like, hey, don't let it get in between a good story. But tens of thousands of people across the country have been changed by this letter that she wrote, and it was the last 2 sentences of the letter that had this powerful message. She wrote, her life's advice to him was, be who you came to be. Love will guide you. And the note resonated with me so much that after sharing it, in my own network, personally and professionally, for almost a decade, I made it my life's work in 2017. So here I am, flash forward, 8 years later, and the message is still being loved and shared internationally.
That's awesome. I mean, I think, and we had a quick little call before the interview here, and I think be who you came to be. I got that right.
Yes, be who you came to be.
Yes. be who you came to be. There's so much there to, I think, unpack as a parent, because what does that really mean, right? In my brain, of course, because I'm all day, right, working with families that have a loved one struggling with mental health or addiction or neurodivergence or learning challenges or what have you. What really does that mean? I mean, there's so many entry points, if you really think about it, where we have to then start with us and say, okay, what is it? What does that really mean for our child to be who they came to be? And what really is our role to support that? Or how are we thwarting
Yeah.
that? So, I mean, what are the ways you help folks, parents or not? And also, just to throw out there, in addition to your awesome, amazing bio and all the great accomplishments you just shouted out, you also have two right,
I have
teenagers
two
as well.
teenage
So,
boys, 16 and 18.
yep. Yep. So you're a couple years ahead of me. So you're an OG in this game, right? So you got a lot of street cred as a mom for sure. You know, how talk a little bit about kind of the convergence of, because I think there's such a parallel of emotional intelligence and allowing and or facilitating, supporting your child to be who they came to be. Where do you see the
Yeah.
crossover there?
You know, obviously as a new mother, it really, the note took my breath away for so many reasons. And, just pondering on that while my oldest son was little, and then I had another child after that. And, it was interesting holding that baby for the first time and looking at
Hmm.
him and reading the words, be who you came to be, and actually holding him and thinking, oh my gosh, like I am going to get to watch this little baby boy grow
Hmm.
into a man, to be who he came to be. And it became this North Star for parenting for my husband and I almost immediately. We committed. My grandmother was such a wise woman. She actually didn't, my other son was born like 20 months later, and she didn't live to see and meet him. But we knew
Hmm.
that we wanted to take this advice. I mean, it was so powerful, simple, profound, but so impactful that we were like, this is our
Hmm.
mission, is to raise this boy, to raise both of these boys, to be who they came to be, not who we wanted them to be, not who, the
Sure.
world wanted them to be, not who their friends wanted them to be. And to do that, as someone who'd studied emotional intelligence, the second half of their life, I knew that that was really kind of the backbone of becoming who we came to be, was truly finding out who we are, what drives us, what do
Hmm.
we like, what makes us
Hmm.
authentic, giving
Hmm.
ourselves the permission to fail, to try things, and then to continue to do that over and over and over and over. So
Hmm.
it just was this really powerful message. And then the truth is that after I had my second son, the message started resonating with me personally, thinking like, okay, well, who am I and who did I come to be? And,
Right.
becoming a mother
Right.
changed me so much. And I wasn't
Sure.
expecting that. And what I found
Hmm.
is, and I think for me, like parenting my child to be who they came to be, um, has been a pretty, I don't want to say simple, but it's been this guiding light where it's like, I always go back to, who is he? Who did he come to be? Not again who I want him to be or the world wants him to be. But I think that so often in life, as adults and as parents specifically, we lose sight of who we are and who we came to be, especially kind of in our midlife, in our
Hmm.
30s. And so
Hmm.
the message,
Hmm.
has resonated so much with adults in their midlife while they're in their working years, of really reigniting that authentic spark of who we are so that we can continue to create, own, and live the life that we deserve and desire.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's so much in there, and one of the things I like that you said is, you sort of went through this process of like, what does it mean for me to be this mother, right, of and momming, if you will, or parenting in this way that allows this child to come to who they need to be and who do I need to be. And I think for so many parents, what's really hard is we ask ourselves like, how am I going to parent? And then we quickly, take on an identity of some book or some, podcast or some, story or something that's folkloric from our family. And all the families that I work with, they have these inherent assumptions. And as you know, right, with two kids, if you have three kids, especially if you have four kids, if one of those kids happens to be, very different than the other kid, we constantly are having to recalibrate, right? And so I think what's really healthy about what you're saying is it is important that we are authentic. It is important that we also allow ourselves and give ourselves the space and grace, right, to be who we needed to be to allow this child to be who they needed to be. And I also here and there, which is so great, and a lot of the families I work with struggle. We talked a little bit about on this on the phone, which is how do they accompany that child? How do they meet that child, right? And some days we do have to, meet that child vis-a-vis setting boundaries, limits, et cetera. Other days we do have to let go and let them fail forward. And there's just so many, skills and tricks and tools that are required in that simple, like you said, simple, but it's very profound. What a profound concept. What a great North Star. And the fact that you're saying it was rather instinctual is awesome. It's not to say you didn't make many,
there's been a lot
turns
of
along the way.
turbulence, but overall,
Of course. Yeah.
it's been such a, my son has even written his college essay around just the notion of being who he
Cool.
came to be and what he's discovered about
Cool.
himself, over these last 18 years. And it's such a powerful note of, I think of, what's interesting is I tell people now about what I'm up to and what I'm doing, and I empower them to be who they came to be. And a couple things happen. One, they usually ask me to repeat it. They say, "Could you repeat that?" Because strangely enough, no one has ever said it like this before. Like, it was actually very easy for us to
Mm-hmm.
trademark because
Mm-hmm.
people say,
Mm-hmm.
"Be you," or "Be authentic," or "Be who you're
Right.
supposed to
Right.
be." People don't know who they're
Right.
supposed to be, but when you say, "Be who you came
Sure.
to be," it's this self-regard of like, I matter. I'm here for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I am 100%
Mm-hmm.
authentic to who I am. And, a couple
Mm-hmm.
things happen even with adults. Like, it first really does change people's self-regard and how they think about themselves. Like, be who I came to be. There's a lot of power in that statement of who they are. And then the love will guide you is such a great, guiding light of how to be who we came to be. Follow love, do what's love,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's hard as
Mm-hmm.
human beings. Like, we have to navigate that a lot. But, then what was also interesting is when you empower someone to be who they came to be, it also starts changing the way they show up. Because I believe, and
Mm-hmm.
I've seen this over and over, people want to do good. They want to show up as their best self. They want to, have higher levels of achievement, fulfillment, success, joy, happiness in their life. And so it's just such a powerful statement that is truly life-changing when people start to embrace it. And the coolest thing about it is once someone owns who they are and it starts to be who they came to be, they give other
Mm-hmm.
people the permission to do the same because we're not
100%.
so worried about wanting someone to be more like us or we're not trying to be more like someone else.
Sure.
It's just this amazing permission slip.
Well, and I think for a child that is, let's say, neurodivergent, or a child that could be into atypical interests, I mean, to be buoyed, right, by that ability to go into that thing and to trust, like you said, from a affirmed position, an empowered position, that's incredibly liberating. I mean, we could be here all day talking about all the healthy neuroplasticity that then is driven forward from that, right? Versus a cortisol driven, stress based, more hidden culture, right? Where a child has to ostensibly thwart who they are. I also think about the piece about love, is again where I go because I'm coaching parents that, have children that are struggling. Love is of absolutely, the homemade cookies. It's absolutely the bedside chats. It's absolutely being heart-centered and supportive and strength-based. But love is also sometimes doing really hard
Yes.
things. And for a lot of my families, that authenticity that you speak of, that empowerment, that self-affirmation, be who I came to be, is that they have to do some hard things that really run up against what maybe their colleagues or their peers or their someone in the neighborhood is doing. And that's why the families who are part of the Four Peaks Parents Program are so courageous, because they're having to step up to the plate of, sending potentially their teenager to a therapeutic boarding school or facilitating intervention for their loved one who's, in a failing to launch 20-year-old struggling with
Right.
addiction. So there's so much
Mm-hmm.
there that's so helpful. And I love that, leading it by love or being driven by love is so
Yeah.
individualized, because it's not this saccharine BS thing. It's actually very tactical and
Mm-hmm.
concrete.
Well, I think that,
And I'm
and
sure.
sometimes love is, it's misunderstood of like, and love, especially I think as a parent, it's not letting your kid go do whatever they want. I mean,
Sure.
even though I'm raising my kid to be who he came to be, I am still the parent.
Sure.
I am still the authority figure.
Totally.
And what I found is children, kids, is even if they push back on it, they want boundaries. They want to know what's expected of them. They
Mhm.
want to know how far they can move the needle. And it's just how they're wired to be. And I had on my podcast, I had this guy who was a former Marine on, and he was saying that accountability is one of the highest forms of love. And that has really stuck with me, because it is like when someone holds you
Mhm.
accountable, it's because
Mhm.
they believe in you, they want the best for
Mhm.
you, they understand what you can achieve and what you can do. And people, generally speaking, don't try to hold us accountable for things that we're not capable of. And so I think for my
Mhm.
kids, so much of it has been very strong boundaries, expectations of
Mhm.
performance, or how they showed up, household chores, like carrying their own weight. I mean, there's all these like small things of like expectations within the family.
Totally.
Um, and then the other thing that we really use in our family a lot of is kind of the self-assessment tool of a clear mirror. We can talk about that, but really it comes down to is like, are you proud of this? And
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, it's really the best gauge, because they're not going to say they're proud if they're not. At least my boys never have. Like, if I'm like, are you proud of
Yeah.
this? Like, was
Mhm.
this your best work? And that's really what matters most. I mean, it doesn't really matter if I'm proud of
Yeah.
it or I think it's great, because I'm
Sure.
not them.
But that shifts again. There's so much. Again, my brain's going off about all the psychology of this too. But that shifts toward that person having their own internal intrinsic motivation, as well as it also shifts them toward having their own internal sort of rubric. And I think what's so wrong right now with a lot of parenting society, et cetera, and I talk a lot about this on the podcast, is if we're not careful, we're raising bots to get into bot university, to go and be a bot, to go so on and so forth, and everything is very externalized. Whereas when you're saying, are you proud of this, right, they then have to basically create their own compass, their own rubric, their own evaluation tool. And that is such a nice shift, and it gives them, again, that like piece of about your guest was talking about accountability, right? Now they have to be accountable to their own standard versus mom or dad's standard, which can create a whole acting out process, can create a whole I'm never good enough process, can create a whole, I'm going to rebel process. So you're putting them right back in that position where they're in charge,
Yeah.
ostensibly, of their own standard.
We
It's so
discovered
brilliant.
this when my youngest son, I'm sure you went through this, where they bring all their backpack home and they throw all the crap on the
Oh, yeah.
counter. And
Totally.
I mean, this
Oh,
was
yeah.
like, preschool, okay, kindergarten maybe. And there was a lot of, I call it noodle art, where it's like, cut and
Mm-hmm.
paste and they glue stuff on
Mm-hmm.
a piece of paper. And then there's just a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of like, I mean, it's just a million papers. So he
Yeah. Oh,
literally
yeah.
threw it on the counter, and then I went through it and I threw it in the trash. And he found it in the trash, and he was upset. Now he's always been this kid, but he comes in, he's like, how could you throw my art in the trash? And I was like, Jack, I'm so sorry. Like, I had no idea this was so important to you.
Sure.
You
Sure.
threw it on the counter. So I just figured that it wasn't that big of a
Yeah.
deal, and that you just wanted me to kind of go through it. And I threw it in the trash. I said,
Sure.
but here's what we can do. Like, let's get it all out. We'll go through it one by one. And then the stuff that you're proud of, we'll talk about. And then we're going to just pick one thing. It's and for your best work. And we'll keep a couple things on the fridge. And then you can
Yeah.
decide if this is your best work, if you're really proud of this. And it changed, right? Because then it was
Mm-hmm.
no longer, you threw my art in the trash. He was having to decide,
Sure.
like, was this his best work? Was he
Sure.
proud of it? And at preschool age, 5 years old, or whatever that age that is, like, he knew whether he was proud of it and whether it was his best work and if he wanted it up on the fridge or not. And
I
again,
love
like,
that.
there were some things I was like, well, I really like this one, like, could I have this one? Or,
Mm-hmm.
and we would do stuff
Mm-hmm.
like this. I remember
Mm-hmm.
my mom loved one of his paintings when he was younger, and so much that she had it framed, and that made him really proud. But
Mm-hmm.
once again,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really matter what I think. It's really getting them critically thinking about are they capable of showing up as their best self and understanding what is their best self? And then
Hmm.
not playing small once once they're willing to be like, I actually really like this. Like, this is my favorite.
Right. Yeah, and I love the concept of best self or best work because again, it's not about was it an A plus or was it this or was it that. It's really asking them to almost close their eyes and do a body scan and check kind of their own litmus test and then say, yeah, this
Yeah.
was my best work
Yeah.
or not so much, right? And I love that you're really pushing them to be more proximal with their own connectedness to self versus distal, right? And they have a relationship with self. And again, I love that you're taking it away from some externalized, stupid, rubric that, someone else is
Yeah.
giving you. I think that's
And I
fantastic.
think that
Yeah.
that is being who we came to be is like, who am I? What do I love? What am I good at? What am I proud
Hmm.
of? Like I said, we have high expectations in this household. We do expect A's and B's. I mean, my kids,
Hmm.
I know they're capable of it if they apply themselves and they
Hmm.
do the work. And,
Hmm.
we've said like, hey, if you're struggling, we'll get you a tutor. Like, we want to make sure that we give them the resources to succeed and win.
Sure.
But, this last year, my youngest son, Jack, he had gotten a C in Spanish, like on a Spanish test. And, he came home, he's like, I got a C in Spanish on this test. And I was like, are you proud of it? And he said, actually, I am proud of it because I have been struggling so hard in this class. And I feel
Hmm.
like a C was actually good for me. I'm like, great. If you're proud of that
Hmm.
and that's what you want, I'm like, that's good enough. I said, just remember that you're going to have to talk to the Air Force Academy about that, if that's where you want
Hmm.
to go.
Hmm.
And all
Hmm.
of it again, it's just like kids are so smart. They are so smart.
Hmm.
And emotional intelligence is ultimately being able to understand your thoughts, your ideas, your emotions, and then choosing how you show up regardless of how you feel. Obviously harder for kids because the frontal part of their brain is not developed, which is where all their good choices
Hmm.
are made. But they
Hmm.
can, I mean, we taught our children to get mentally fit from a very young age and to
Hmm.
understand that
Hmm.
you are not your emotions and that you get to choose how you show up regardless of how you feel. You are entitled to have a bad day. You are only human. You can have a bad day. I have bad days too, but you're not entitled to give other people a bad day. And the kids, they really do catch on to this. They're very, very intuitive and smart.
I'm sure I know you're talking, on a corporate level, but that message I think resonates big time for the young adult. Last week, or last episode, I should say, we had Jamie Diglio on who was talking a lot about young adults in their early career. And I think there's such a connection to what you're saying on an emotional intelligence level because this idea of I'm authentic and I'm going to show up and in a bad way and I'm going to contaminate other people and boundary violate. That kills me when I hear
That is not
people
authenticity.
misappropriate. No,
Yeah.
no, I
But
know.
yes, people say that.
Trust
It's
me, I
just
know
who I am, right?
all the time. It's just who I am. And it's like, no. And so what I love is that, love without boundaries isn't love. Number one, I say that all the time. And then love without, I would say, EI or intentionality isn't also right love or authenticity. So that idea of I love myself enough to be in tune with I am having a bad day, or I could even have bipolar and still right show up because I am doing a great job regulating my medication, my sleep, my exercise. I have a client who's on the spectrum, and we talk all the time about the irony of how high functioning she is, that she often passes. And so, in a weird way, it's actually a gift and a curse because most people don't think that she's on the spectrum. And she is dealing with such an invisible backpack that the next person is not. And it is hard, right, for her to be in all these situations. So, but how does she want to show up and who does she want to share that with, right, at work or not? Who's deserving of that story? But she's doing an amazing job on the PR, not being fake and trying to ostensibly mask all day because that's exhausting. But just she's doing an amazing job with that intentionality of self and showing up in a way that is she's proud
Right.
of. It's just there's so much there on the again EI side that it really I think people think EI is like, oh, I'm just gonna like learn a few little buzzwords, but it's really like you said, inner work is what I'm hearing is going inside and really understanding who am I, who did I, who am I becoming ostensibly, who did I who am I about to become, and how do I honor that and journey and accompany myself before I go and make contact with anybody
Yeah.
else. And I think, again, a lot of people fail to go in before they try to go out and create influence. And speak a little bit more about, you mentioned something about the mirror and you said you were going to talk about that tool. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear more about
Yeah.
that.
Well, I remind my boys, I think an easy way for kids, and they caught on to this fast, is like, you have to know your audience. Like, how you act around your friends is not how you act around the teachers at school. How you even act in our house is going to be different than how you might act when, we're out in public. And, obviously we had we used Love and Logic in our house. I'm sure you know about Jim Fay's Love and Logic. It was just such a great tool, especially for my oldest son, who was more impulsive than my other son, who, my other son was he's just always has been this, like, he's the kid who, like, every teacher loves him. Like, and my oldest son was the kid that none of the teachers really liked him until they figured out how to have him in the classroom. And, once they figured that out, he became like one of their favorite students because they learned how to have him in the classroom. And for him, we don't have to get in this, but he was always best in a leadership role. Like, he was the kid who didn't want to let the teachers down, didn't want to let his friends down. And it seemed counterproductive, that the teacher would be like, you want me to put him in a leadership role? I mean, yes, like, ask him to do stuff, ask him to hand out papers, put him up in the front. And they were like, oh my God, this has worked wonders, because he literally does better when there was expectations around him. So the Clear Mirror to Self-Assess is a tool that we have used with our kids since they were very, very little. I used it in the corporate world when I ran my sales teams. And rather than having, my sales reps come in for their quarterly review and I review their business and tell them what they're doing good and where they need to work and all that, which creates so much anxiety for employees in general,
100%.
especially in high performance positions that are, numbered, measured like they are in sales. So I would just say, hey, we're going to use this thing called a Clear Mirror to Self-Assess. Why do we call it that? Because when you're looking in a mirror, all you're really focused on is yourself. And it takes out the equation of everything else that you could pass blame on, that you could, make excuses for. And instead it's like, hey, this Clear Mirror, I'm literally looking at myself, how I've been showing up regardless of the situations, what I'm doing in my business. And it worked wonders. Like, my sales reps, they loved it. And our quarterly reviews were so productive because, first off, it was an opportunity for them to come in and say what they were doing well. But it also gave them the permission to say, if I worked on this, if I changed this, if I did this better. And so it was this ownership of their ability and also their performance. So when our kids, started growing up, I'd done this for years. And like, I just remember, like, they would go, we tried all the sports. We're trying to help them be who they came to be. So we tried all the stuff. And I remember my son, Ben, he kind of realized that he liked baseball. And so the more games we went to, like, I noticed this trend happening. The kids would come off the sidelines and they would all run up to the parents and they'd say, how did I do? And every time the parents would say, you were great. Oh my God, you were so amazing. Even if they were the worst kid on the team, right? And I was just like, oh my God, this is really not good. Like, we should not be telling our kids they're good at stuff that they're not good, which is a huge problem. I think a lot of the kids that have been entering the workforce, they grew up in this, this don't ever just only praise. Like, so I was like, well, I was like, I'm just going to try the Clear Mirror on Ben. Like, I'm just going to be like, well, so he came out. How did I do? I said, well, how do you think you did? Just asked him. Now, he would, at first he was like, I was pretty awesome. I mean, he was a little kid and I would be like, hey, you know what? We'd find something to celebrate. Tell me about that pop fly you caught. He wanted to share that and like how good it felt. And then I would turn the Clear Mirror back and I would say, let's talk about the bottom of the fifth, which was, the last inning, and he struck out. And he would always try to blame at first, like, that pitcher was really bad. And I would say, hey, it's baseball. You can't control the pitcher. Like, they're going to throw you whatever pitch they want. They might actually hit you with the ball. And, he would be like, yeah, I was actually nervous about getting hit with the ball. And then he'd try to blame again, like, the umpires were terrible. Hey, you can't control the umpires. It's baseball. They call every play. Like, they're going to get calls wrong. And sometimes you're just not going to like the calls. We just kept turning that Clear Mirror back to him. And it was pretty extraordinary what happened that summer. He got to be really good at baseball. And he was the one who was like, I need a batting lesson. Let's work on pitching. Dad, can we go out and catch some pop flies? Suddenly he was hyper focused on what he could control and where he could get better. And that gave him all his power back because it was no longer, he didn't have to worry about us being like, you really need to work on fielding. He knew he needed to work on fielding. And that is carried over into my kids' academics, into literally everything they do is using that clear mirror to figure out what they need to tweak, what they need to do better, and then have the ownership of it. And, it's just been so fun to watch that development happen and the accountability, but also just the self-regard and then the self-actualization of like, oh my God, I could get so much better at this if I worked on these things.
And there's so much there. Some of the folks listening know that I've coached at a very high level. My kids play soccer at a very high level, and I played in college. And so earlier on in my parenting journey, I definitely made a bunch of mistakes of flying way too low and trying to contrive outcomes and seeing the ROI of where my kids, because they stated right they wanted to play in college or play at the next level. And what I've done now is exactly what you've talked about, which is awesome. And what I do, which is exactly the same thing, but a slight different tool, is I have 10 cards in my car, usually, literally like playing cards. And we then just grab a card, and my son will have to say what was a play or a moment that was an 8. What was a play that was a 2? What was a play that
Brilliant.
was a 10?
I love that.
Yeah. And well, what's really cool, because now what's nice about it, similar to what you're saying, is having played, I coached at the National Academy level of soccer, and my kids played MLS Next and all that. So there's this high soccer IQ to these conversations. There isn't a saccharine BS conversation like you talked about, where the parent is just giving, effusive praise to that child. That's lying to your child. That doesn't serve them, right?
It creates a ton of insecurity and distrust. Like the kids are like, they know.
Distrust.
And then they don't trust you on anything else. They're like, okay, well, yeah, totally. It's a terrible thing to do to your child.
And then the young adult piece, I mean, Simon Sinek talks about this all the time, that like you look at now it's almost not even this young adult career person's fault, because they were ego stroked, if you will, their whole life and didn't have the competency, the foundational skills. So what you're doing there with your son, which is awesome, and I'm trying to do the same thing, which is, have them authentically be who they came to be. You're saying you want to play at the next level. So let's really call a 10 a 10. Let's really call a 2 a 2, right? So that was a 1 play when you didn't track back or whatever. And the cool thing about the what did you do well kind of conversation that you were doing there, what didn't go so hot, is again, you're having a standard that is directly germane to, again, the degree to which they want to achieve. And there's a sense of ownership. And because you stepped away, and I've thankfully now done this, it's taken me maybe a little longer than it took you. But now my kids are owning it way more. And there is no adversarial, relationship where they're unconsciously angry because they're doing this crap for me, or there isn't this mistrust because I'm not telling them they're great. In fact, it's probably the other way, and I've coached these parents where, they all tell me their kids are messy, and it kills me because, I played Division II. The college I went to is now Division I, and every school I played is now Division I. But, I didn't play pro, and yet I understand the percentage and the margins of, the numbers are ridiculous of who's even playing in college, never mind who's playing, pro. So there's so much. What I love, I think if someone's listening and they think that you're somehow like a tiger mom or something, what I love, or cruel or something, or harsh or whatever, what I love is that they're missing the fact that everything you just said about the mirror and this whole interview is incredibly strength-based and incredibly positive, because it's really honest. It's also meeting your child where they're at. And going back to that thing about your son saying, this was my best, whether you believe him or not, but you're allowing him to own that. And for families, I use this analogy all the time. For a kiddo who's on the spectrum who could have some developmental delays and be very overwhelmed by the sensory stimuli, let's say, of a bowling party, that is like climbing Mount Everest. You know what I mean? So we can gradiate ostensibly the rubric and be situational to our child and understand their context, but we're still going to ask them to truly own, is this your
Right.
best? And then help them determine what is a 3 versus a 10 and join them and accompany them in that journey. It's just
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's such a big
Yeah, and
shift.
it's a lot when you have I think as a parent, anytime something with your child is wrong or not, I remember when my boys were little, no one could understand them. They had their speech, they had horrible speech. Like I took them to get
Mm,
audited and they came back like inaudible. Like they were like they are
mhm,
so far away from being able to be understood. And I remember as a parent, like it was scary and I was sad. I was like, oh my God, like what am I gonna do?
mhm,
Like no one can understand my kids,
mhm.
which creates a very big learning boundary, right? Or
Totally.
and so, we got them in speech therapy and we did all these things and but as a parent, no matter what age they are, like when something's not a 10 out of a 10, like it hurts the parent, it hurts our hearts. And because
Mhm,
we do want the best for our kids. But what I found is, first off, my boys would be like, my mom is the most loving mom. She celebrates
mhm,
me. She
mhm,
has given me so much confidence in who I am, but also the ability
mhm,
to fail and to be human. And my
mhm,
oldest son, who was extremely impulsive. I mean, I got calls all the time from the school. And we
mhm,
finally, yeah, I don't even remember what grade it was in, but it was young. He was in lower level. And I finally told him, I said, Ben, I said, here's where we're going to be at with this. I said, you're learning and I'm learning. I said, if something happens at the school, you need to tell me as soon as you get in the car. Like, I don't want to
mhm,
hear about it from the school first. I want to hear about it
mhm,
from you. And
mhm,
I just want you to know that I am a safe person for you to talk to. And that also changed everything for him, of knowing that like my mom loves me no matter what. And
mhm,
it also
mhm,
gave him, I think, the ability to state his side versus being like, I got another call from the school, where then that makes him feel so small. He didn't want to
mhm,
get in trouble at school. He didn't want to be impulsive.
mhm,
He just
mhm,
was learning how to control his impulsiveness, and really, like, I mean, I had to teach him, like, you're not your thoughts. Like, just because you thought about flipping that water bottle doesn't mean you should have done it. And he was like, really?
mhm,
I was like, yes, like you're
mhm,
gonna have like for the rest of your,
mhm,
I'm an impulsive person myself. I'm like, you will have all these impulsive thoughts and you just literally let them crawl through your brain. And once he
mhm,
realized he could do that, and then once I gave him that, hey, like I want to hear from you first, it just changed our relationship so much. And to this day, I mean, my boys, they know that like if they did something really bad, there would be a consequence for it. But I am also the first person that they would want to call if they needed to call
mhm.
someone. That they wouldn't be like, oh my God, I can't have my
That's
mom
awesome.
find this out. They would be like, oh my God, I need to call my mom right now.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, because you've never threatened the relationship. You've kept the
Yeah.
door open, and the attachment is the greatest protective
Yes.
factor that any child could ever have. And so, I also like the piece about you are not sort of your thoughts, and we talked a little bit about that before our interview. And there's a piece in the third peak of the Four Peaks program is called upgrading your toolkit, and I talk a lot about it's almost like you can take space and see the Robert Frost poem. And it's the faster that we can actually put a pause between impulse and action and realize that in that space between stimulus and response, we actually can choose our choice. And we could see ourselves almost choosing, right, the unhinged, emotionally dysregulated parenting choice, which I've definitely done. And if we do that, of course, we're not also the worst parent in the world. And I talk a lot in the program about tear and repair and how we can always, right, come back and start the day again and keep seeking attachment. And the fact that you kept putting time and energy toward the attachment and toward building a secure, really open, honest relationship, that as you know, the dividends of that are a
Yeah.
100,000-fold, right? So that's awesome.
Well, and you know what?
I
I'm not like, there were times where I had to go to my kids and be like, I am sorry for how I acted this morning. I was not being my best self.
mhm,
I let my emotions get the best of me.
totally.
I want to
Yeah.
apologize to you, and I'm going to do better myself. I love you. And it also, I think, is just like, I tell my boys all the time, you're only human. Like, we are only humans.
Mhm,
I think
mhm,
really understanding that we're not our thoughts, for me, has been so powerful. And interestingly enough, I talk to adults all the time, and every time after I get off stage, I have people come up to me and be like, I've never thought about this thing that I'm not my thoughts. I'm like, 80, and studies, they've studied the human brain. 80% of your thoughts every day are negative, biased, and repetitive. They're not even true. The mind is, I always say, the mind is a great servant. It's a terrible master. You have to be in charge of how you want to wire your brain to serve you. And once you understand that like thoughts can crawl through your head, they're like pop-ups on your computer. You don't have to pop on any of them, I like to get people to understand this. I'm like, it's no different than like waking up at 3 a.m. and you're in a deep sleep and your brain is firing thoughts right at 3 a.m. right? And it's usually, it's never good stuff. Like no one's ever like, hey, it's 3 a.m. I want to wake you up and tell you you're just kicking ass in life. Like, great job. You're an awesome mom. Like, way to go. Now go back to sleep. Instead it's like, hey, remember in 2005 when you like when you lost your mind at the playground or whatever it was, like, a corporate party. And that is what I'm saying about your mind. Your mind is just firing thoughts and you really have to learn. Now, you can't ever stop the mind from doing it. Like I have 80% of my thoughts still are negative bias. They just crawl through, but I've been able to recognize them and say, that's just a thought. That is not a truth of mine. And to get mentally fit enough to understand how I am sabotaging myself with those and being like, oh, I see, this is a hyperachiever here. This is the pleaser. This is the victim, like coming out and then being like, it's not me.
There's so much there. One of the things I love doing with parents is I'll have them actually draw their inner bitch or inner critic, and then we name it. And so this person I was working with recently came up with naming their person Wanda the Worrier. And so when they have this thought, it's like, oh, that's Wanda. And we made them like very like Long Island and like New Jersey.
I love it.
So it's like, oh my God, it's like Wanda, she's worried. Oh my God, what's gonna happen?
It's
what
so
if,
fun.
what if, it's like amazing. So then, but then it gives her space to be like, well, that's Wanda's shit. Wanda can own that. And we're externalizing kind of the worrier, right? And that's just so great about you are not your thoughts. And a lot of my clients, that struggle with obsessional thinking or anxiety, it almost becomes, they believe it becomes a part of their character structure or who they are. And you can have very weird, bizarre thoughts and be a very good person. And so just, again, giving people that space to pick and choose, right? What does it really mean to be my authentic self? What does it really mean to be who I came to be is just so liberating. And I want to give you a moment to shout out how folks can reach out to you, because clearly in this interview, you've represented all the value that you offer, obviously, to folks that could be executives, to, of course, parents. If someone wanted to potentially book you for a keynote, or they wanted to just reach out and learn more about your book or what you're up to, how
thanks
can
so
they
much. My website, Tara Renze, TaraRenze.com, is by far the best place to go. You can sign up for I send out Tuesday tips, which are emotional intelligence tips for life, for love, for just in general. They're not salesy. They literally are tips. And I'm so proud of them because they have like a 64% open rate and there's thousands of people on the subscribe. So they're really, really great tips. The great thing to do. You can find me there. You can message me through my website. I hang out on Instagram a lot at Tara Renze. And then the other thing, just because you were talking about it, is if you go to my website, you can find a link to a self-assessment for positive intelligence. And it's what you were talking about, of these inner critics, these saboteurs that we have, and it helps you name them and find them. And so it's all there. You can get my book there. Thanks so much for having me. This is a great conversation. A conversation that I think is so needed. And, I always remind parents too, like, you're only human, you're doing your best. It's all a first for you. And you're still trying to discover who you came to be. And that's a lifelong journey. And as we have children, that also changes with every age that our kids are at. Who I was when my kids were middle schoolers is not who I am now that they're in high school. Like, it's just, I always say, like, right when you think you have it figured out, everything changes. And once you give yourself that permission slip to go with the flow and change, and again, to show up as your best self and to give yourself grace, to be like, you're only human. And I think going back to that whole be who you came to be, love will guide you. Think about that even as a parent, like, who did I come to be as a parent? And how do I let love guide me to do that?
Thank you so much. And I want to, of course, I want to check my open rate now. I'm like, what is my open rate on my newsletter? So for any folks listening who of course have a kiddo, it could be a tween, teen, or a failing to launch young adult who's struggling with mental health addiction or is just exhibiting disruptive behaviors in your household and running roughshod all over. Oh my God, you and your partner, you, and you're losing sleep and tired of being on the emotional roller coaster, please reach out for a free discovery call to learn more about the Four Peaks Parents Program and whether it be the right fit for you, as well as you can sign up for my newsletter in the show notes. I will definitely plug your website in the description as well on all the social media postings, so folks can find Tara's website if they didn't get that written down. But thank you so much, and I greatly appreciate everything that you offered, and I learned a lot, and I'm really excited to really use more of that mirroring approach and kind of keep putting it back on my kids, as well as allowing them to be who they came to be and keep allowing me to be who I came to be as a father and as a person. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
This
This was a wonderful conversation. Keep shining.
All right,
bye-bye.
Thank you so much.